All right, guys, so let's move to Tuesday's class. Gotta go through some slides here. No, don't start that. Okay, there we go. Tuesday's class. All right, so we're going to be looking at humanism and linear perspective today. That was the major development in the early Renaissance. Okay, so the early Renaissance is mainly associated with the city of Florence and as a birthplace of the movement, and it has many, it's basically the main center of artistic innovation, Florence. Has anyone here ever been to Italy or been to not the Renaissance, that's impossible, but to Florence specifically? Has anyone ever been there before? Okay, it doesn't look like it. Well, if you guys ever have the opportunity in the future, it is a really cool place to go visit. I went there with my family, but we were only there for a little while, like a couple of hours. It would have been nice if we were there longer, but it is a really cool place to go see, especially if you're really, really interested in art. Okay, so the early Renaissance art introduces a greater degree of naturalism by placing an emphasis on the observational drawing of the human figure. It also establishes a more precise spatial organization of the figures, buildings, and landscapes through the invention of perspective drawing. Okay, so this is something that you see here and that's demonstrated in this particular painting, the beginnings of it. All right, another fancy word, this very intellectual word, humanism. What is that? Okay, so basically a humanistic subject matter based on the study of classical mythology along with portraiture and landscape evolved as acceptable subjects for art. So these are things that we are surrounded by as humans. So the nature aspect, a lot of art dedicated to the human figure, the human form, portraits of humans. Okay, it's something that was starting to be further explored in the early Renaissance period. Okay, and they were starting to move a little bit away from this whole religious focus and more centered on just sort of ordinary people as well. Okay. All right, so the measure of all things. Does anyone recognize this drawing over here? Does anybody know what it's called? Does anyone know who it's by? This drawing here. Anyone want to take a guess? You can use the chat if you're. Maria, no clue. Okay, that's fair enough. All right, so this is a drawing done by, I'll give you clues and let's see if we can figure it out. He's a very well-known Renaissance man. Yes, thank you, John. It's Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, no, guys, I hope you know this. Like, it drives me mental a little bit. A lot of my students in the past, my last name is Leonardin, right? Do you know how many times I'm referred to as Miss Leonardo? Like, I don't know where I always it's somehow always changed. But I always feel like it's a little bit of a nod to one of the best artists in the world, Leonardo da Vinci. So I just take it, I accept it. It's fine. All right. So this is a drawing done by Leonardo da Vinci. It's called the Vitruvian Man. And the great thing about this drawing is if you guys ever have the opportunity to, I'm not saying go do this now, but if you guys have like a measuring tape at home, I would like you guys to just measure the width of your arm span from like fingertip to fingertip. If you measure that, that's how tall you are. And if you don't believe me, try it because it's actually true. I tried it because I didn't believe it either at the time. But that's actually how tall you are. So that's kind of crazy. It doesn't look like it. You're like, no, I'm much taller than that. That's ridiculous, but it's true. Okay. Anyway, just a little fun side note there. All right. So back to the important information. So the Renaissance, oops, my bad. Let's go back here. So the Renaissance humanism could be defined by Protagoras' statement that man is the measure of all things. In simple terms, this meant that any individual could shape their own character and influence their own future by the way they lived their life. So this is really big, guys, because in the past, religion and those at the head of the church were making a lot of decisions for people. And there was this big shift of like, no, you know what? Let me take some control here. Thanks, but no thanks. All right. So there's a little bit of that shift happening in the Renaissance as well. The measure of all things here. So this was the midst that had contributed to the success of the great classical civilization. So there was this big push to also kind of reminisce about how the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans were very much they were very brilliant for their time, right? There was just this great value for discussing philosophy, science, the complexity of life, the exploration of the human form, life itself, the natural world. So as much as they wanted to move forward the Renaissance, they were very intrigued by sort of the ancient Greek, ancient Roman way of thought, like the exploration, right? With the great philosophers like Aristotle and Plato and all those individuals. They were intrigued by their thinking, right? It was just a wonderful time. And so for many artists in the Renaissance, they were tired, of course, of the medieval era that they felt like they went back 2 steps and now they're trying to go forward. And they were really kind of wanting to bring all these incredible ideas that these original ancient figures did so well. So they really wanted to celebrate that. So that's a little bit of what they're talking about in terms of classical civilizations here. Okay. So it is a new wave of rational thought and critical analysis challenged the civil and religious authorities of the medieval Italy and revitalized both education and religion by creating greater respect for intellectual freedom. Okay, so this is kind of like what these individuals like Plato, Aristotle, these great Greek philosophers represented, was this freedom of thought, this intellectual freedom that they just sort of began. They were really sort of inspired by it. Okay, so unlike later forms of humanism, the Renaissance humanists did not deny their Christian faith. They simply wanted a more direct line to the Almighty, missing out some of the middle management of the church. Okay, so their aim was to increase the responsibility of the individual in determining their own destiny. All right, so in early Renaissance, one aspect of naturalism in art was related to the problem of arranging the figures in buildings in a landscape to create the illusion of depth. Okay, so this is something that they were really sort of focused on. They wanted to depict depth more accurately in paintings and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of experimenting, a lot of exploring in this area. Okay, and this is something that a lot of the Italian artists were playing around with. So basically a mathematical solution to this was discovered around 1413 by Leon Battista Alberti and Filippo Brunelleschi, okay, when they developed the laws of linear perspective. So these two guys, and primarily Filippo, they were sort of the leaders of developing linear perspective and one-point perspective in particular. Okay, this is just the beginnings, all right? So perspective drawing allowed artists to accurately portray the 3-dimensional world on a 2-dimensional surface, right? This is something that for many artists, they struggled with, doing perspective, doing depth accurately. And they were like, there's gotta be an easier way to do all this. There has to be some system we can use. And so that's basically what was developed during the Renaissance. This is something that you can really applaud them for doing, okay? These two individuals especially. All right, so in Perugino's painting of Christ giving the keys to the kingdom to St. Peter, we can see how the receding lines of perspective created by the courtyard grid all converge at a vanishing point on the horizon line. So here's our vanishing point right in the center, okay, which is both the eye level of the artist and viewer, all right? And you can see it here, and that's basically the center of their viewpoint primarily, okay? All right, so here we have Filippo Brunelleschi. There's a quick little biography of his accomplishments, so let's watch that together, okay?
According to Filippo Brunelleschi's biographer, he stood just inside the main doors of the Cathedral of Florence when he conducted his first perspectival experiment, and that's where we're standing right now.
We're very close to it. Brunelleschi's experiment demonstrated that linear perspective could produce an incredibly realistic illusion of 3-dimensional space on a 2-dimensional surface.
So this notion that we can actually develop a system that would be relatively easy to follow, but highly accurate, that could translate the volumetric world that we move through through time onto a frozen two-dimensional surface is really an extraordinary achievement. There's some discussion among scholars as to whether or not there was linear perspective in the ancient world, but if there was, it was lost. And linear perspective was created, at least for us in the modern world, by Brunelleschi in the 15th century, around 1420.
Right, and so some people say that Brunelleschi rediscovered linear perspective in case the ancient Greeks and Romans had it before him.
Brunelleschi had gone to Rome and had studied antiquity, and some have hypothesized that he developed the basis for linear perspective in an attempt to be able to accurately portray the buildings that he was looking at, that he was sketching, that he was drawing.
It's certainly something that artists beginning really in the 1300s were creating forms. They were creating human figures that were three-dimensional by using modeling and making the figures bulky and monumental. Then you had the challenge of putting those figures within a believable space. Giotto and Duccio had kind of approximated that space and began to create a kind of earthly setting for their figures, but had not achieved perfect illusion of space for their figures to inhabit.
As the culture becomes increasingly analytical, mathematical, it's a trade-based culture. This is a culture that in some ways may have demanded of its artists a kind of precision, a kind of mathematical accuracy in its representation. And Brunelleschi delivers that. So what does he do?
Brunelleschi creates a perspectively accurate image of the baptistry and its surround.
Right. So Brunelleschi develops a system with just a few essential elements, and through these elements is able to construct accurate scientific one-point perspective. They include a vanishing point, which is at the viewer's horizon line, as well as a series of orthogonals or illusionistically receding diagonals. What Brunelleschi then does is he paints or draws an image of the baptistry with linear perspective and puts a small hole in the center of it. He takes that small drawing or painting, puts a handle on it, and holds it in front of his face, but facing away from him. He then takes a mirror and holds it in back of that. Now remember, his painting has a small hole in it, so he can see through it straight to the vanishing point.
So he's holding the mirror at arm's length and the actual painting with the hole in it right in front of him for his eye to look through.
Right. So you can see the painting's reflection in the mirror. And if he pulls the mirror away, you can see the actual baptistry. And he can bring the mirror back to see the painting, move the mirror away to see the actual baptistry, and see if, in fact, those lines are well coordinated. And it was a very convincing experiment.
What Brunelleschi saw in the reflection of the painting looked exactly like the reality that was in front of him.
This would have the most profound effect on the history of Western art. Virtually every painting in the Western tradition after the 15th century is responding to linear perspective, either adopting it or very consciously rejecting it for some reason.
And within a couple of decades after Brunelleschi's discovery, Alberti, the brilliant architect and theoretician, writes a book called On Painting, in which he codifies Brunelleschi's discovery and creates a manual for artists of how to use linear perspective and how to make great paintings.
Okay, guys, so that's just a little interesting video that kind of just shows you what Brunelleschi did to sort of achieve one-point perspective, how he figured it out. And I know the whole painting and mirror thing sounds like a total headache in itself, right? You're watching like, how did he come to this right? It's just, but anyway, he figured it out. Good for him. I'm glad it was him, not me, because I would not have come to that conclusion back then. All right, so anyway, Filippo Brunelleschi had to figure out how to design and build the biggest dome on the biggest church in the world. The Santa Maria del Fiore is what it's called. Brunelleschi also had to convince everyone that he had the best plan, right? Just that whole ego side of the artist, right? So how linear perspective works. This technique is based on the way the human eye sees the world. Objects that are closer to the eye appear larger. Distant objects appear smaller. So very straightforward. To create the illusion of space, artists create a vanishing point on the horizon line. Objects are drawn using orthogonal lines, which lead to the vanishing point. So they're basically, orthogonal lines, guys, are just like very faint little lines that are just there to help guide all of these sort of objects towards the vanishing point so that when they're drawn, they look three-dimensional, okay? All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, so again, here are some terms. right? The horizon line, vanishing point, and orthogonal lines. They're for you. They're there to be defined there for you. All right. Now, how many of you guys did a drawing or something like that in elementary school of like train tracks? Does anyone remember that drawing? I think we all did it at some point. It was either like a road or a train track, and it was going all the way out into the distance, and then the road looked like it was going like towards like an upside down V. Do you guys all remember that activity? Twas a road. Okay, thank you, Rachel. Yes, all right. So that was the introduction to 1-point perspective for you even then. Okay, so that was an introduction to drawing depth. All right. Okay, so let's move on to how linear perspective works. Okay, now guys, this is a painting that's very, very well known, as well as many others. And why? Because again, it's using 1-point perspective to construct the depth that we see in this painting here. Okay, so can you locate the horizontal line and the vanishing point in this art example? All right, so I think we can all agree that the horizon line is going right across, obviously where all of these men are standing together, right? And the vanishing point, just by looking at the direction of the lines, okay, of where they are going, if you just are looking at some of these, like, what's this called? Pillars. The word is escaping me. I'm sorry, guys. It's Tuesday morning. It'll come back to me. Anyway, you guys know what I'm saying. Okay, the architectural details that we see, in these buildings itself, they're all coming to a point into the center here, which is shown by these red lines to emphasize the vanishing point and where they all meet. Okay. All right, so how linear perspective works. So Brunelleschi realized that from your particular view, if you break everything down into simple lines, the lines are moving vertical, horizontal, or orthogonal, and are drawn to a single vanishing point. Okay, so here we have an example with that. Okay, here's some photographic examples of 1-point perspective. Okay. All right, so guys, for today, our focus is going to be on 1-point perspective, and we're just going to be completing an exercise. So there's no discussion today, okay? By the end of class, however, you're just going to take a picture of your exercise and you are going to submit it. All right, so what do you have to do today? On a white sheet of paper or in your sketchbook, you will use 1-point perspective to turn shapes into forms. Okay, so step 1, you're going to create a vanishing point. So that vanishing point can be in the center, can be a little further above, can be a little bit further to the side, but that's up to you. You are then going to draw a horizontal line that intersects with the vanishing points. This is your horizon line. So that would be this line right here. Okay. Step 3, you will then choose 4 shapes to draw above the horizon line. So here we have these, this is an example, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 4 shapes below the vanishing point, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So your goal, guys, is to turn these 2-dimensional shapes into 3-dimensional forms. Refer to this example if you need help. Okay. Now, guys, I don't mind that you use maybe a couple of these shapes here shown in this example, but you can do whatever shape you like. Okay. You can do whatever objects you like. You can even look around your house. Maybe you want to do like a coffee mug or a glass or something like that, and try to make it look 3-dimensional. If you want to just stick with basic shapes, that's totally cool as well. Okay, it's just to get you sort of practicing 1-point perspective and getting a little bit more comfortable with that. When we return to break, you guys are going to be making or creating a more complicated drawing with either 1-point or 2-point perspective. So this is something that you should just try and get comfortable with doing and practicing. Okay. So that's all that there is today, guys. I just wanted to sort of introduce you guys to linear perspective today, and especially 1-point perspective at least. Okay. So you're just going to complete this exercise, and by the end of today, we're going to submit it on D2L. Okay. So I'm just going to exit here and I'll show you where everything is. Okay, how many of you have done something like this before? 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective in grade 9 or 10. Has anyone here ever done that? Okay, good. All right, some people have. All right. Okay, that's awesome. All right, so let's go scroll down to art history over here. Move this up a little bit. All right, so I'm going to make this number 1 visible to you because that would help. All right, guys, so all you're going to do today is once you're done your drawing, you're going to take a picture and then you can go to the assignments. I have to change this to view as student. There we go. Okay, so you can either click it here or in contents. Okay, so I'll just click it here. And then you can upload your linear perspective exercise here. Okay, and that's all we're doing for today. I told you guys that this week it's like an easy breezy week. I think we all need that right now. I think we're all a little worn out. All right. Okay. Sorry, Rachel, as a small optional exercise. Okay, so you did 1-point or 2-point perspective before as another additional exercise in the past. Okay, so are there any other questions for me, guys, before I give you some time to do this? This is a wonderful week. Thank you. Yes, I know it's an easy breezy week. I did this purposely. Okay, so today, guys, is just an exercise. Tomorrow's class, we're going to be doing another Jamboard discussion. However, we're going to be looking at the 3 masters of the Renaissance. Anyone want to take a guess at who these 3 masters might be? Yes, Leonardo is one of them. Anyone want to take a guess at who the other 2 might be? Let's see if we can guess. Michelangelo, very good, John. You get a little applause for that one. Yes, very good. Leonardo DiCaprio, well, I kind of agree. He is kind of cute. So yeah, for sure. Let's put him in. We'll add him to the mix. I'm sorry, guys. I grew up with Leonardo DiCaprio, and also like Titanic was really big when I was a kid, and so all the girls had a crush on Leonardo DiCaprio. It's just a fact, okay? And somewhere in my house I have the VHS copy of Titanic. So there you go. All right. And does anyone want to do Ninja Turtles? Yeah, there you go. Yes, and I had a Ninja Turtle table. I was that kid. I think that was like one of my Christmas presents from like my godmother. She got me that Ninja Turtle table with chairs. It was awesome. Donatello? No, Raphael. There you go. Jonathan, good job, buddy. Yes, Raphael. All right, so yes, we're going to be talking about Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael tomorrow. Okay. All right, guys. So I'm going to leave you till about 10 o'clock. We'll do our second check-in at 10 o'clock. Okay. And then you guys can just check in and then leave for the rest of the day. Okay. All right. So I'll see you guys then.